Let's get into it here with the top 14 most important things fantasy football players need to know ahead of the 2024 season about coaching changes. Cleveland Browns fired Alex Van Pelt. I thought somewhat surprisingly, considering the way their offense kind of rolled into the playoffs last year with Joe Flacco before flaming out. But anyways, they get rid of Alex Van Pelt. They bring in Ken Dorsey. Now, I thought this was interesting, Evan, because there's controversy out there in Cleveland who is going to call the plays. Kevin Stefanski actually, I believe, was calling the plays, not Alex Van Pelt. Now there's a lot of speculation that Ken Dorsey will be calling plays for the Browns. Evan, thoughts on Mr. Dorsey stepping in Cleveland?
Yeah, Kevin Stefanski definitely called plays last year for the Browns. And, considering their quarterback situation and their offensive line situation, they were decimated up front, and they played, 5 different quarterbacks over the course of the season. They were very, very efficient, all things considered. Ken Dorsey comes over from Buffalo. He was like an original Brian Daboll guy. He's a believer in spread offense. And that has been the theme of the offseason in Cleveland, that they are going to change their offense, which actually makes sense considering their receiver additions, considering the likely prolonged absence of Nick Chubb, and they're going to play more spread, and they're going to try to jumpstart Deshaun Watson. But that's the kind of like schematic leaning that Ken Dorsey brings. And, I don't think that he's necessarily going to call plays or anything. I don't even think that matters. What matters is that it looks like there is a potentially significant offensive shift in the way that the Browns are going to line up on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, we'll get to the Titans here eventually, Daigle. But when you remove Nick Chubb from this offense, obviously you want to change it a lot. I actually think that their 4 skill player set is actually going to be nice, or 5 player if you include Jerome Ford, can catch the football, Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, or Cedric Tillman, and then David Njoku. I don't mind running spread out of that. Daigle, any thoughts on Ken Dorsey stepping in for the Browns?
And to your point, I do believe Van Pelt reportedly was let go just because he didn't cater the offense enough to Deshaun Watson, since that guaranteed contract is really what matters most in Cleveland. But to me, it was just the fact that, remember, Dorsey was fired because the Bills were losing, not because his offense was not explosive. He was still 8th and 5th his last 2 seasons in Buffalo, and neutral pass rate. So I believe it's going to be a perhaps more explosive offense in Cleveland that really just boils down to whether or not Deshaun Watson can finally turn the corner and be comfortable there.
Yeah, it's tough. These guys are expensive, right? Amari Cooper is expensive. David Njoku is palatable. The one that I thought, if they're going to run spread and try to throw a lot, maybe that helps Jerry Jeudy to get his career on track. Maybe he's not good enough to do so, but I still think it's an interesting spot for a scenery change upgrade for Jerry Jeudy. Only other thing that I'd say on this is I am not that worried about Deshaun Watson off field, all this stuff. Deshaun Watson doesn't want to play football. I know Evan said that. I know there's been speculation. My biggest concern is this shoulder injury that Deshaun Watson has seems like weird. It's not like a standard shoulder thing. He continues to rehab, so we'll be following that. The good news, I would say, for Brown stuff, and if they're going to run spread, the backup is Jameis Winston. The backup is Jameis Winston. We could have a lot of fun if Deshaun Watson isn't out there. Daigle, any final thoughts here on Cleveland?
I don't think people understand as well how much longer the pathway is for Jerome Ford to have a higher floor given Nick Chubb's injury. The more we dive into home league ADP compared to best ball, it really seems like Ford is going to slip through the cracks, with everyone assuming Chubb will come back completely healthy in the second half of the season, when that's not guaranteed. So right now, I think Ford is going to be a screaming value when we open up those Yahoo and ESPN ADPs.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. And he also fits a more spread-oriented offense to a greater extent than Nick Chubb. I mean, yeah, I'm pretty excited about Jerome Ford.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to number 13 on the list here. Bill Belichick has sailed off into the sunset. And if by sunset you mean 24-year-old cheerleaders, that is what Bill Belichick is up to now. He has been replaced by Gerard Mayo. The offensive coordinator is an important one here. Obviously, Gerard Mayo is a defensive guy. Offensive coordinator is a guy we just talked about, Alex Van Pelt. I don't know, Silva. I feel like they don't have enough talent for like coaches to really make a mark here. But what do you think about Alex Van Pelt and Gerard Mayo here in charge of the Patriots?
So Alex Van Pelt is 54 years old. He's coached for a bunch of different teams. He's had many offensive coordinator gigs previously. Was the quarterback's coach for Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. but he's never really generated like head coaching interest, which kind of tells me that he's just kind of like a replacement level coach who doesn't move the needle, and it's going to be particularly difficult to move the needle in New England considering their shortage of skill position talent and offensive line talent and their rookie quarterback situation. And it's a defensive minded head coach who's probably going to want to run the ball. They have the makings of what could be a top 5 defense, especially with Christian Gonzalez coming back at cornerback. And I don't think that this one is going to matter a whole lot. Alex Van Pelt, take him or leave him.
Yeah, exactly. That was kind of my thought, Daigle. I didn't even think we had to cover this necessarily because what are you going to do with their talent? Anyways, you can't be too creative. But any thoughts on Alex Van Pelt running the offense for the Patriots, Daigle?
The last 2 years in Cleveland, the Browns led the league in man blocking, 2 tight end sets, and 6 lineman usage. But they did change their scheme once Joe Flacco went under center and became a high-flying offense that literally doubled their rate of play action down the stretch. I think Van Pelt does want to be a balance of that, but as both of you said, just bereft that talent at wide receiver. Really, I think for fantasy, we're trying to pinpoint whenever Drake May will be under center. And right now, given their brutal opening schedule, week 1 in Cincinnati, week 3 at the Jets, then get 10 days off before traveling across the country to San Francisco, I'm guessing, at least right now, we're going to see May around week 5 when they return home against the Dolphins. And it's interesting, but just because we talk about Jaden Daniels, we'll go in depth on him more later. But May also, in his 2 years as North Carolina starter, averaged 9.4 rushing points per game. Yeah. I think he is the quarterback that can carry out this bootleg scheme that Van Pelt probably wants to run. Again, it just comes down to who the hell is going to catch the ball there.
I know. I'm not excited about it, but I do the emergency backdoors, Jalim Polk, Drake May, or Hunter Henry, Drake May in emergency. That's not really a home league thing, but for best ball, that's one that I do in emergency. By the way, you can see all of our emergency / backdoor stacks if you have the best ball product. Daigle's been updating that on a weekly basis in the best ball tab. All right, let's get to some interesting ones here. Number 12, most important on the list, Raiders go with Luke Getsy as their offensive coordinator. Now, remember, Josh McDaniels was the head coach last season. They fire him midway through the year. Antonio Pierce comes in and kind of booms it up a little bit, but earns the job, I thought, by connecting with the players, going 5-4 down the stretch, having a really good defense. Getsy, of course, was the offensive coordinator for the Bears last season, which was a mess. And you could put that on Justin Fields or whatever, but it was not pretty. Evan, thoughts on Luke Getsy taking over the offense of the Las Vegas Raiders?
Yeah, he was the offensive coordinator for the Bears the last 2 years. And there were some ups, some promising moments, I thought, from Luke Getsy, but it was mostly negative. He would try to curtail the offense or try to install within the offense like a more passing-oriented approach, featuring Justin Fields as a passer, and like they would have to pull that out of the playbook, and sometimes it felt like it took them too long to, like, they had to center that offense around their rushing attack. They had a pretty powerful offensive line. They had some good backs, and Justin Fields is an excellent runner. Took way too much time to get the ball out, and just that never worked. So from a planning standpoint, I thought that Luke Getsy was largely unimpressive. This is another offensive coordinator hire, however, that I think might not move the needle very much, because this is Antonio Pierce's team. He's like the heart and soul of this team at this point. They are built to run the ball. I mean, they've got Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell as their quarterback options. Zamir White. By the way, have you guys seen the offseason photos of Zamir White?
Yes.
Yeah, he looks like Mike
jacked.
Tyson in his prime, ready to just handle like 375 carries. So
that's how you're going to look by week 1.
Yeah, exactly. But Zamir, I mean, I think this is all about Antonio Pierce and Zamir White, and Luke Getsy, not a guy who really moves the needle.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have a ton of talent. They added Rome, obviously, this offseason for the Bears, but they didn't have a ton of talent last year. They were 26th in 3 wide receiver rate. Given the personnel, Daigle, Mayer, and Bowers, you're going to see a ton of 2 tight end sets, I assume, with Michael Mayer tight and Brock Bowers flexed out wide more. But yeah, any thoughts on Getsy and how he's going to handle this Raiders offense?
I believe there's a agreement in the hard-nosed philosophy between Pierce and Getsy. Even if you remove Justin Fields rushing in Chicago, the Bears led the league in running back carries per game the last 2 years. My concern for that approach and any Zamir White breakout hype is that the Raiders trailed for the fourth fewest plays under Pierce last year. A lot of that due to their schedule of opposing quarterbacks. What happens when that unsustainable type of play doesn't last in the NFL? What happens when they get punched in the mouth? Then what do they do with White, and what does this offense become? That's what worries me about their approach.
Yeah, I'm fine with a fade on Zamir White, especially if he starts going like round 6 or round 7 in home leagues or something like that. I think a fade on Zamir White is fine there. If he drops further, I'm okay with it. I do think defense is going to be very good. I think they have the talent and the scheme to be really good on defense, and maybe that keeps them in some of these games like Daigle's talking about where it's low scoring. Maybe they're leading by a little bit. They can maybe play that way for a little. Obviously, when your quarterbacks are AOC and Gardner Minshew, you're not going to be projected to be leading a ton of games.
Another thing to note here is that, and I mentioned on the Pace podcast with Pat Thorman, but you just look at the construction of their pass catcher core. They've got Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, and then not very much. I mean, they took a flyer on Michael Gallup. Jalen Guyton is a guy that has been, a fringe NFL player. Trey Tucker, maybe they could get something out of him, but he's like a little gadget slot type guy. And then they've got 4 playable tight ends. Obviously, the number 13 overall pick in Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, the 35th pick in the 2023 draft, Harrison Bryant, who won the Mackey Award in college and can play, I think, and then Zach Gentry, who's played a lot in the NFL and is like a blocker. So they're going to play a ton of 2 and even 3 tight end sets, and that's how they're going to play in 2024.
They might lead the entire NFL in 2 tight end sets. Daigle, go ahead. Any more thoughts on the Raiders?
I was diving into the top of the receiver tiers, coming to a draft kit package near you soon. And Davante Adams is going to be an interesting case study because we talk about bailing on receivers as they get older. And now in his age 31, 32 season, coming off his 4th consecutive year where he dipped in both receiving yards and fantasy points per game, I am sure he's a guy who earns targets, but what does that mean from Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell in this offense? Does that lead to a top 15 wide receiver status? I really don't know.
Devontae Adams also, over his last 13 games, he went below 60 yards 8 times.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And look, you could blame it on quarterback play. It's not like their quarterback play is all of a sudden going to be rejuvenated this year. So that's an ongoing problem.
The bull case on Davante Adams is there's very few NFL wide receivers who can get 30% of the targets or 35% of the targets in a given game. And Davante Adams has shown an ability to do that repeatedly, historically. Last thing I'd say on Raiders coaching, they could just totally boom it up. I mean, they could go total boomer here and just try to run the ball on every play and everything. And it's going to be ugly. I tweeted a quote from the tight ends coach yesterday that sounded extremely boomerish. Raiders Twitter got a hold of it. Holy cow. Oh my God. Raiders Twitter is going after me hard in the mentions right now. It's really funny. I might retweet some of them a little later. But yeah, Raiders Nation is not happy with my suggestion that perhaps they're going to boom it up here with Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. All right. Let's go to number 11. So massive changes for the Commanders. Ownership group is out. Ron Rivera, Eric Bieniemy are gone. Enter Dan Quinn as the head coach and our old friend Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator for the new franchise quarterback, Jaden Daniels. Lot to chew on here, Daigle. What do you think about Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury taking over the Washington Commanders?
As Thorman noted in the Pace pod, Kingsbury's offenses in Arizona led the league in no huddle rate and neutral situation pace. So that's already a positive for their offense. But beyond that, as I put in our team preview on the site right now, Kingsbury's air raid system has really catered to Kyler Murray and mobile quarterbacks to the next level, running against light boxes, 6 defenders or less, at the league's highest rate in that time, and which is great for a rushing quarterback like Jaden Daniels. Not only that, but maybe that's not the case with who they've brought on in Washington, but Dan Quinn, remember, in Atlanta was a lot like Norv Turner, Wade Phillips, Freddie Kitchens, and that he was a coach who could not take on too much because everything lacked when he tried to do that. And so his defenses in Atlanta for all 6 seasons finished in the bottom half of the league in EPA per play. So when you combine all of that, I think it's going to be a really fantasy-friendly situation for Jaden Daniels, who in home league ADP right now is going as the QB 14. And that seems wild considering, like, when you add in the 9.7 rushing points per game he averaged in college, that he could easily beat out a Dak Prescott, Joe Burrow, Brock Purdy, those guys who were going rounds before him.
Yeah. In best ball, that's starting to get tighter. I was thinking a ton of Jaden Daniels when he was going with a big gap between that Dak, Love, Burrow tier. Now he's starting to go a bit closer to that tier. Evan, we have had a checkered history with Cliff Kingsbury. I hated the way that he ran that Arizona offense, the horizontal raid. It didn't make any sense to me. I also thought that he had Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech, and I understand Patrick Mahomes put up big numbers, but it wasn't like the team was great. How do you not dominate with Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback in college? But anyways, I think, and also I should add, the other thing that I have with Cliff Kingsbury, he dated Vegas Dave's ex-girlfriend. I mean, how sharp can you be? How smart can you be if you dated Vegas Dave's ex-girlfriend? So, I have a lot of issues with Cliff. Maybe I'm too hard on him. Evan, what do you think about Cliff here in charge of the Washington Commanders?
Are we sure that was actually ever Vegas Dave's girlfriend? Like, is that confirmed? Because I don't really trust anything that Vegas Dave says, like, at all.
We have photo and video evidence. I mean, these days I know you can't even trust that, but still, we have evidence.
Yeah. So Cliff Kingsbury, it's kind of easy to rip him because he didn't have the winning record with Patrick Mahomes, and during his time in Arizona, the offense as a whole petered out. It actually started hot, if you remember. I mean, Kyler and DeAndre Hopkins had an incredible rapport early in that tenure, but it never got better. It got worse. And then last year, Cliff Kingsbury was at USC, and Caleb Williams had the worst year of his career relative to the Heisman and his freshman year at Oklahoma. So it's kind of easy to rip Cliff Kingsbury, but Kyler did play some of his best football there for a fairly significant stretch in Arizona with Cliff Kingsbury, and Jaden Daniels theoretically has some similarities to Kyler Murray, could be deployed in some of the similar ways. So I don't know. I'm kind of like leaning optimistic on Cliff Kingsbury. I think he gets a little bit of a bad rap.
Oh God,
I know. It's hard to say.
Really is hard to say. But yeah, the things that concern me for Commanders' outlook is I'm a bit more pessimistic on Kingsbury and Brandon Thorne's dead last in the NFL offensive line. But other than that, I mean, I think Jaden Daniels should absolutely smash in this.
One thing I'll say about Caleb having the worst college year of his career at USC and Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech, neither of those teams had strong supporting casts. I mean, the top receiver drafted out of USC this past year was Brandon Rice. He went in the 7th round, and those Texas Tech teams were very, very low on talent. So, I'm sitting here defending Cliff Kingsbury, which makes me feel uncomfortable. But I do think he gets a little bit of a bad rap because it's easy to rip him.
I was just reading an Athletic article. I mean, you mentioned Brandon Rice, just triggered it in my mind. I was reading the Athletic. Brandon Rice, speculation he may not even make the team for a really poor Chargers. But it's very early. These beat writer speculations about who's going to make the team and not is just.
And USC's offensive line this past year was a swinging gate. I went to that Notre Dame USC game. We brought on Renner, who also went to that game, and he went back and watched the tape, and he was like, they couldn't protect at all. So again, they were talent deficient under Cliff Kingsbury.
All right, let's go to the number 10 most important coaching change fantasy players need to know for the 2024 season. It is the Eagles changing their offensive coordinator. Brian Johnson is out, replaced by Kellen Moore, who of course was Cowboys offensive coordinator until last year, where he was one and done with the Los Angeles Chargers. I thought Eagles offense needed some help. The quotes, though, Evan, are like 95% of the offense is new, all this. That kind of scares me a little bit. What do you think about Kellen Moore taking over the Eagles offense here?
95% of the offense is new, huh?
That was for Jalen Hurts quote, yeah.
I had not read that one. That's a little bit surprising to me. I don't think you got to change a whole lot. I mean, this is an absolute juggernaut offense from left tackle to right tackle, in the wide receiver core, at tight end, at quarterback with a healthy Jalen Hurts. I just think that this is a situation where Kellen Moore, like, he would have to really try to mess this up. This is, this is on a silver platter. It's the most talented offense in the league.
That's the thing, Daigle. I kind of consider the best coaches the ones that just adapt to their talent. So even if it's 95% new, as Jalen Hurts said, I'm not sure it will be completely different. And I also trust Kellen Moore. Maybe I shouldn't, but I actually trust Kellen Moore to like try to get the most out of his players, not just fit them to his scheme, if you follow what I'm saying. But Daigle, any thoughts on Kellen Moore going to the Eagles here?
You should trust the volume Moore brings to every offense he's been with. The Chargers last year, third highest no huddle rate. The Cowboys finished top 6 in plays per game each season that Dak Prescott was healthy. I just tend to throw whatever the hell happened to the Eagles in the second half of last year out the window. They were already in the offseason lifting with Zamir White by the time they played that playoff game against the Bucs. Like Jalen Hurts, for instance, in his last 9 starts, averaged 7.5 carries through multiple injuries, when for his career he's averaged over 12. Just forget about the second half of last season. Right now, Jalen Hurts is being drafted in the 4th round on ESPN and Yahoo, and that's around T. Higgins, George Pickens, guys you literally never draft over someone who can outscore Josh Allen as the QB1 this year. So Jalen Hurts to me is a buy.
Yeah. I mean, from a projection standpoint, Hurts is a smash. Like we have, I believe from projection, we might even have Hurts ahead of Allen. It's really close there between those two. But yeah, we are big bet on Eagles bounce back. And I think Kellen Moore is a sharp guy that I feel pretty good about that.
95% offensive change is a big statement, but I think that it was a tumultuous offense last year under Brian Johnson, who only lasted 1 year. I mean, I think he was hated in Philadelphia by the end of his tenure. So I don't know. I mean, changing the offense probably is, it probably has a lot of positive aspects to it, considering how up and down they were last season with, the same amount of talent.
For sure. All right. Speaking of old friends, number 9, we need to get to the Steelers. Now, they fired Matt Canada midseason. I hated Matt Canada. Everybody hated Matt Canada. The thing about the Steelers is they always like hire in the cocoon, as Evan would say. Bruce Arians, Randy Fichtner, Matt Canada, even Todd Haley had Steelers ties. He actually made a statement in Mike Tomlin, I want to go outside the organization for this hire. I was like, great. They land on Arthur Smith. Yes, Arthur Smith, who ran the most prehistoric offense. The freaking Falcons last year were in a 3 wide receiver set, I believe 17% of the time. The next shortest team in that stat was 41%. I mean, it was absolutely prehistoric. Now, Daigle's going to tell me a bunch of stuff about how Arthur Smith wasn't that bad with the Titans, et cetera, and it's going to tilt me. So I'll let you go here, Daigle. What do you think about Arthur Smith taking over as offensive coordinator of the Steelers?
It's always hard to compliment someone who's an asshole, but I will remove the Titans, and I'll tell you the good things he did with the Falcons, because Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, and Cordarrelle Patterson all averaged over 4 yards per carry against 8-man boxes the last 2 seasons. For everything wrong that Arthur Smith does between using his talent, drafting the talent overall, in terms of play calling, he's still very good at his job. So although this will be a prehistoric offense we don't want to watch, I do think both Jalen Warren and Najee Harris can have a lot of success for fantasy this year.
I mean, I thought that one of the biggest winners of the offseason was Steelers' run game, because we know Arthur Smith is going to coordinate a good run game. We know Arthur Smith is going to run the ball at absurd rates. And people are like, oh, but how can they support Najee and Jalen and CPAT's going to play? Because they're going to run the ball more than any team in the entire league. They might lead the league in neutral situation run rate, given their personnel. They're not even trying to get a number 2 wide receiver. They got Mark Kabley out here calling Van Jefferson their number 2 wide receiver. I mean, it's a freaking joke. So anyways, Evan, any more thoughts on our old friend Arthur Smith taking over the Steelers?
Well, after defending Cliff Kingsbury, let me be the first to defend Arthur Smith. First of all, I have a special place in my heart for Arthur Smith, because do you remember when Matt LaFleur was rotating Dion Lewis and Derrick Henry? Well, Arthur Smith put an end to that. And that's when the big dog rose from the ashes, and so I got to credit him for that. He is an asshole. I mean, that much is clear. He was also like born on home plate because his father founded FedEx.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are reasons to root against him, like as a person, but I think that this is like literally the perfect offensive coordinator hire for this team. At this stage of career, Russell Wilson's 33. He's really on his last legs. Maybe we'll see some Justin Fields this year, although that competition, the way it started, it doesn't sound like we're going to see a whole lot of Justin Fields. But the offensive line, which was awesome in run blocking, particularly after they installed Broderick Jones as a starter, largely comes back, and they added first, second, and fourth round picks to that offensive line. They are going to be able to block out the sun this year, and that's the way that they need to play, and that's the way that Arthur Smith plays. So I think from a team standpoint, from like a real life NFL standpoint, this was an awesome hire. From a fantasy standpoint, the consistency of George Pickens is probably going to be non-existent. Pat Freiermuth, he's going to be another extremely touchdown dependent tight end. Go ahead, Daigle.
It's such a weak argument, but right now, Najee and Jalen are both going in practically the same spot, the same round in best ball drafts, and I just split my exposure. I don't even have a take because I think both are going to do well this year.
Yeah, so do I.
So do I.
Yeah, God. Can't believe we have Evan and Daigle here talking positively about Arthur Smith.
For fantasy, that's it.
I was talking positively about him in real life.
His life.
By the way, Thorne has this offensive line 15th overall. I want to be clear on Thorne's offensive line rankings. They are slanted towards pass protection. He even notes in the Steelers blurb that he has that he expects them to be much better than 15th in run blocking. I mean, they could be really elite in run blocking, the Steelers offensive line. As Evan said, they got some massive guys and invested serious draft capital into their offensive line. All right, let's go to number 8. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had to replace their offensive coordinator because Dave Canales went to Carolina. We'll get to that in a second. So when you lose Dave Canales, who has gotten a ton of credit for reviving careers of guys like Geno Smith and then Baker Mayfield, there's concern, I think, Evan, that this Bucs offense turns into a pumpkin under Liam Cohen. Now, Liam Cohen is just 38 years old. He's worked under Sean McVay a ton. He was also Kentucky's offensive coordinator for a couple years. I don't know a ton about him, but I'm actually kind of optimistic about Liam Cohen, given his age. I know that's a horrible thing to judge someone on, but given that he's young and he worked for McVay, I'm actually somewhat optimistic here. We'll see. Evan, what do you think about Liam Cohen taking over the Bucs?
Well, that's what stands out about him to me, I think, is that, his long history with Sean McVay. I mean, he was there with their 18 and 19, 2020, and 22. So, I mean, that's what, almost a half decade there with Sean McVay, and guys that come from that tree tend to have success. I mean, that's the most successful tree in the NFL right now, is the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan sort of tree there. So that's what stands out about him to me. Dave Canales did a really, really good job with Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans and everything. So, is Liam Cohen going to move the needle positively or negatively? That's difficult to say. I don't know that Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield can play as well as they did last season, but certainly the track record of Liam Cohen just being attached to that McVay tree is promising.
I mean, so I was just going to say, Dale, that I think Evans and Mayfield played at their ceiling last year is what Evan's trying to say. Like, no matter without Canales coming back, I feel like there's only one way they can go. Doesn't mean they're not fine.
Even
picks,
if Canales had come back, it's likely that, at least Baker Mayfield would have regressed to the mean a little bit.
Yeah. Go ahead, Daigle.
In 2021, the year that Silva missed because Cohen was in college, that was the year he was coaching Will Levis in the SEC to basically his best season ever. So it is interesting, but like both of you said, I don't want to be the person to follow up Canales literally getting the royalties from Baker Mayfield's contract, all because he learned how to scheme up Baker under pressure.
Yeah. Other thing that I would say is there's been chatter this offseason. Liam Cohen is going to install the Rams offense, and Chris Godwin will be in the Cooper Kupp role. And that has caused Chris Godwin's ADP to spike really high. We were already high on Godwin, I think mostly based just on historicals and touchdown rate regressing positively back from last year. But yeah, that's kind of sent his ADP in best ball, at least, to the stratosphere. So, these Rams offenses that McVay runs and a lot of his disciples run are awesome for fantasy because they're so predictable. They're going to have 3 wide receivers out there. Rams had 95% rate of 3 wide receiver sets, and it's the same guys every single time at running back, tight end, wide receivers. So I think Liam Cohen's going to install that. We don't know for sure, though. But
I know that Rachaad White can be a polarizing player, and I mean, he's polarizing to me. One day I wake up, I like Rachaad White. One day I wake up, I don't. The running games for the Rams with Liam Cohen on staff were awesome. Throughout McVay's tenure, really, dating back to Todd Gurley, and I think that's at very least a little bit of a positive for Rachaad White.
For sure. All right. Let's go to number 7 here, Daigle, with the New Orleans Saints, where Pete Carmichael is out as the offensive coordinator. Clint Kubiak is in. Now, I'm sure you guys all remember the Kubiak name. Gary Kubiak, of course, was the head coach of the Texans and Broncos, among others, ran the Shanahan scheme. I thought really, really well. I thought Gary Kubiak's schemes were really friendly for fantasy. He was feeding the alpha wide receiver a ton, had really good run games. Obviously, we have no idea if his son is going to try to execute the same kind of offense that his father did. But yeah, Daigle, any thoughts on Clint Kubiak, just 37 years old, offensive coordinator of the Saints?
Had played for the Saints since 2012 whenever Sean Payton exited. It was long overdue. Like when I moved out of Silva's basement. Long overdue. But we do know last year's Saints called the second lowest rate of motion, and they were dead last in play action. And so really why Rashid Shaheed is going to be one of my highest rostered players in best ball, while he'll probably be a flag plant for me in redraft leagues, is because I'm just betting on the unknown. I don't think it could get worse. And if it even travels to league average, we're talking about Shaheed, who I believe is who everyone wants Jameson Williams to become. Shaheed has already done that in a part-time role. And Olave, who's 8th in yards per route run from play action in his career so far. So again, I don't know if it's going to be good, but I know the Saints have 12 of their 17 games indoors. And I know it hopefully cannot be as bad as last year.
I take Olave a ton in the second round. I mean, a ton. And Olave has been incredible at earning targets and earning them deep down the field. I think that with Clint Kubiak here, he's going to get more chances to have insane amount of targets, short area, middle of the field, just easier targets for Chris Olave to catch. So I take Olave over Mike Evans for sure. And I actually usually take Olave over Ayuk and Debo, although I think that one is a little bit closer. Evan, any thoughts on Clint Kubiak here taking over the Saints?
I think he's got, a somewhat interesting resume for a guy that really has not been a prominent. I mean, he hasn't called plays in the NFL. So he hasn't really been a prominent figure necessarily. He's had some stints as an offensive coordinator who didn't call plays. He always liked Gary Kubiak's offenses back in the day. His time is obviously has passed, but I mean, he ran efficient offenses back in the day, from that Mike Shanahan tree. And then last year, Clint Kubiak was the passing game coordinator for Kyle Shanahan. And that's, obviously that same tree that we were just discussing. So there are some reasons for optimism here. And I think it begins with what Daigle mentioned, that Pete Carmichael was like a disaster. He just didn't do anything to help the offense. Underhill was never a big fan of him either. He was just kind of like Sean Payton's buddy, cronyism. That's why Pete Carmichael had a job for so long.
Yeah, by the way, Sam Sherman is working on an article right now about teams that use motion rate and teams that don't. I mean, the data is very clear. The more motion that you use pre-snap, the more efficient your wide receivers and tight ends typically are. And so look for that on the site in the next few weeks as well. All right. Starting to get into some real important ones here. Let's go to number 6. Carolina Panthers. So we just mentioned Dave Canales. He's the head coach. He's going to call plays for the Panthers this year. And this ascension for Dave Canales has been rapid. First offensive coordinator chance was just last year with the Bucs. Absolutely knocked it out of the park. Revives Baker. We just talked about that. Some would say he's also responsible for reviving Geno Smith. So I really like the hire for the Panthers, who, yeah, it's only been 1 year, but Bryce Young appears to need some reviving already. So, Evan, can Dave Canales revive Bryce Young? And what do you think about his offense in Carolina?
It still very much bothers me that Bryce Young is 5'10", 190 pounds, and isn't really a scrambler. And, his best comparable coming out of college was Drew Brees. And Drew Brees was like the most picture perfect, fundamental technician quarterback, like maybe of all time. And that's that's what the standard that we need Bryce Young to play at for him to be a successful quarterback. That still bothers me about Bryce Young, regardless of who's going to be coaching him. The Panthers have done a lot to try to help him. I mean, they spent the entire offseason. The entire offseason was dedicated to trying to spark Bryce Young from the hire of Dave Canales, who, as you mentioned, had a lot of success with Geno Smith before reviving Baker Mayfield last year, to spending all this money on the offensive guards, which again is it's the blueprint of Drew Brees. Drew Brees always had awesome interior offensive line play because he was that short quarterback, and they always emphasize that over the tackles. And then you see the Panthers spend ungodly amounts on Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt. So I don't know. It still bothers me the misgivings about Bryce Young to the extent that I don't know. This is going to be a tough one. I definitely think they'll be better than last year, but they were the worst last year. So it's not saying very much.
Exactly. But I would say, Daigle, that the reasons for optimism on this offense to me are obviously the offensive line play that Evan mentioned, but everybody's like, oh, Deontay Johnson. Bryce Young had no one could get open last year. Deontay Johnson gets open at the highest rate in the league, and that's going to help Bryce Young a ton. And you got Dave Canales, who has been this QB whisperer, or he's, in a small sample, has earned a tag as a QB whisperer. So those are the reasons for optimism. I still don't feel great about it. Daigle, any thoughts on Canales in Carolina?
Silva forgot to mention the third problem with Bryce Young, and that only Josh Norris can find a highlight for him from last year. But for Canales, it is funny because I always thought Todd Bowles was responsible for their 2 yards and a cloud of dust mentality. But every presser, Canales just leaps to tell you about their running game, almost as if that's how they're going to protect Young. And when a rookie comes in, hell, even veterans, when they struggle against pressure, I don't worry about it. But it was concerning that Young averaged a league low 6.2 yards per attempt from a clean pocket when no one was around him. And so Deontay Johnson, yes, will be a reception machine. He'll be a high floor PPR guy. But like y'all, I still question the ceiling of this offense. And to me, that's really about Jonathan Brooks as well, because right now Brooks is mid-80s ADP. It seems like the injury is already baked into that. People are just saying he's going to play the whole year and be effective when I really don't know. I don't have an opinion on it. So I'm trying to still get a gauge on Brooks and his output.
Yeah. I mean, they have 2 reasonable backs already in Chuba and Miles. They don't have to rush Jonathan Brooks, but I did think that it was a statement that they spent such a high pick on Jonathan Brooks coming off of the ACL. I forget what the quote was. I can't find it right now, but I think Canales said something like, you guys are going to be shocked at how stubborn I can be with the run game, or something like that. I butchered the quote, but it was something along those lines. So we'll see.
The biggest beneficiary, and you guys kind of touched on, is if this offense can reach a level of competence, I think it's Deontay Johnson. I think he's going to absolutely eat. I don't even care about my misgivings with Bryce Young as it concerns Deontay Johnson, because he's going to get open consistently. I think he's going to have a ton of targets, and he's a target. Do you think that people are going to hold Bryce Young's, shortcomings against Deontay Johnson in the draft rooms, because Deontay Johnson seems like a guy who could, hit like 140 targets, no problem.
Oh, I think he'll definitely get to 130, 140 targets. And by the way, it's not like Bryce Young can't support a fantasy wide receiver. As a stone cold rookie last year, he had Adam Thielen in the first half of the year as like a top 5 fantasy wide receiver. It was absolutely insane. I played Adam Thielen in cash like 3 times with Bryce Young, and it actually worked. I mean, Jesus Christ. So yeah, he can certainly do it for Deontay Johnson. All right. Important one here, I think. Number 5 is the Seattle Seahawks. Pete Carroll and Shane Waldron are out. Mike McDonald and Ryan Grubb are in. Now, Mike McDonald, of course, longtime Ravens defensive assistant, defensive coordinator. Ryan Grubb is 48 years old, zero, stone cold zero NFL experience, but came to fame last year with that outrageously explosive University of Washington offense. I'll start with you here, Daigle. Seahawks complete overhaul here of the coaching staff. What do you think of Ryan Grubb as the offensive coordinator?
No play calling experience and has tag teamed their offenses basically with now Alabama coach Kalen DeBoer across two different schools. And even in last year's rendition of the Washington air raid offense with Michael Penix, their starting running back rushed for 1,100 yards and 16 touchdowns. Washington finished ninth in the nation in pass play rate. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know if they are going to deploy three wide sets as much as Shane Waldron wanted to, maybe even leaning on Ken Walker a little more. But honestly, I'm looking to Silva for this one because it's up in the air between like what Grubb will do in his first year doing this.
I mean, that scares me because we've been a little bit ahead of market on Lockett and a lot ahead of market on JSN. And if they're not going to play a lot of three wide receiver sets, that's going to get a little sticky. Evan, any thoughts on Ryan Grubb and the Seahawks offense?
I mean, I think that they're going to play a lot of three receiver sets. I mean, the Washington Huskies had three receivers drafted in the first 3 rounds. You know, they were playing spread offense. Ryan Grubb is actually a longtime offensive line coach, which I thought was interesting when I was, researching him a little bit. But I think the Seahawks are going to be very spread out. I think that's good news for Jackson Smith and Jigba. I question whether Tyler Lockett is on his last legs. But, I mean, they have the personnel to run a lot of three receiver sets still, and DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. And the Washington Huskies ran a lot of three receiver personnel. So I think they're actually going to be pretty spread out, and all those guys are going to be on the field a ton. And I think that's good for all three of those guys.
Last year, Seahawks were 15th in rate of three wide receivers or more on the field at 65%. The only other thing that I would say is that it couldn't get worse for JSN usage. I mean, his ADOT last year was around 1 yard or something for a lot of the year. I mean, it was absolutely pathetic. It absolutely cannot get worse for JSN usage. So that's part of the reason that we're so much higher, or we were so much higher on market than him until he really started.
One more thing, the Washington Huskies threw the ball downfield as well as any team in the nation with Michael Penix at quarterback. I mean, they were throwing the ball downfield. Jalen McMillan, drafted in the 3rd round by Tampa Bay, he was like a vertical slot receiver. That's something that Tyler Lockett has done historically, and I think that could be good news for Jackson Smith and Jigba, who's certainly going to see his fair share of time in the slot as well.
Let's go to the Bears. Evan and Daigle are both living in the Chicago area. We just mentioned Shane Waldron. Shane Waldron is replacing Luke Getsy as the offensive coordinator. Waldron, I thought, kind of earned the reputation as Sean McVay's right-hand man, ends up with the Seahawks offensive coordinator job in 2021. Especially last year, I really did not like the way that he ran that Seahawks offense. I mentioned the JSN bungling of that. But yeah, Evan, any thoughts on Waldron taking over for a completely overhauled Bears offense?
Well, on the Pace show, I liked the way that Pat Thorman kind of explained why they were so low in plays per game. And it was because they couldn't stay on the field. They were not a sustaining offense, and because they couldn't stop the run. So, I mean, they're just getting bled in terms of the clock game to game. And so we can kind of excuse a little bit of that from Shane Waldron. They also had a big problem in the red zone. They weren't like a terrible offense by any means. It's just they had very few plays, and they didn't execute in the red zone. Shane Waldron is another guy. I mean, he spent a lot of time with Sean McVay, 2016 through 2020. And the Seahawks under Shane Waldron were a team that threw the ball downfield. Geno Smith is low-key one of the better downfield passers in the league. Caleb Williams can absolutely do that. And this receiver core is nuts. I mean, it could be the best three receiver set in the NFL in 2024. So I think that this is a fairly positive hire and certainly an upgrade on Luke Getsy, Shane Waldron in Chicago.
Yeah, Daigle, the Bears last year were 26th in three wide receiver rate. I mean, that's going to spike massively given the personnel and the coaching changes here. Daigle, any thoughts on the Bears' outlook under Shane Waldron.
And I wonder how much Pete Carroll played a hand in limiting Waldron wanting to pass the ball. But for everything Silva said, for everything Thorman said on the last show, we know what the Bears are going to do. Not to mention having a soft schedule, the 7th easiest passing schedule per Warren Sharp. And just the fact that DeAndre Swift was the first running back, literally over Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, the first running back on the market, a primary pass catching back. So we know how they're going to play for better or worse.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest schematic philosophical changes we'll see this year is from the Bears. We'll get to a few more of the biggest changes going forward here. All right. Number 3 is going to be one of the biggest changes we see year over year, maybe in NFL history. I don't know. The Chargers, Brandon Staley regime is over. They bring in the Boomtown, Jim Harbaugh, head coach, Greg Roman, offensive coordinator. Of course, Jim Harbaugh coached the Niners from 2011 to 2014. Greg Roman was his offensive coordinator there as well. Greg Roman has a long history of coaching mobile quarterbacks such as Lamar Jackson. Evan, what do you think about Greg Roman and Harbaugh here with the Los Angeles Chargers and Justin Herbert?
I mean, it's just every single sign is pointing to an extreme run-heavy offense. Greg Roman's history, Jim Harbaugh's history, the fact that their biggest free agent addition was a blocking tight end in Will Dissly, the fact that they drafted when they have, the biggest receiver need in the NFL by far, they in a great receiver draft, at least up top, they went with the offensive lineman and Joe Alt. It's just every single signal, like they are screaming at you that they are going to try to lead the NFL in rushing attempts. And I want to say, and I know that we have extreme skepticism about running back coming back from injuries, like the ones that J.K. Dobbins has endured. I'm leaving the light open, the light on a little bit for J.K. Dobbins, just because of the way that we know the Chargers are going to play. And obviously, Kamani Vidal is really, really interesting too. And, Gus Edwards is going to have a role, but I'm leaving the light on for J.K. Dobbins.
The thing is, okay, great. You want to come in and run some really run-heavy attack? Great. Your running backs are a 32-year-old Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins off an Achilles tear and a blown-out knee, and some fifth-round guy that the fantasy community has a hard-on for. You know what I mean? It's not the greatest setup for that either. And I'd also say that the first thing they did that, to me, signaled what they were going to do was they let Keenan Allen and Mike Williams walk, and they kept Bosa and Khalil Mack. And it's like they're going to try to play defense and run the ball. I just don't know, Daigle. Like you said about the Raiders, I mean, they're going to get behind. They're going to have to start throwing at some point, and then the receivers are Josh Palmer, Ladd McConkey, and a bunch of dust. So Bill Barnwell just wrote an article ranking teams' skill players, and he had the Chargers stone cold dead last, ranking their running back, wide receiver, tight end. Bill Barnwell had the Chargers stone cold dead last. So, yeah, I think we know what these coaches want to do. What will they be able to do, though? I think it's an open question. Anyways, Daigle, any thoughts on Chargers here with Harbaugh and Roman?
And we never thought we'd see the day Justin Herbert going as the QB 18, 19, and ADP, but that's what's happening because we don't think this offense can throw the ball, or at least don't want to. Even Joe Alt, like Silva mentioned, as an overlapping pick for Rashawn Slater, and they just said, we'll figure it out with the top 10 pick. They didn't even know. But under Greg Roman, obviously, the Ravens offense led the league in run play rate from neutral game script in all 4 seasons. So I'm taking chances. I'm taking shots on Gus Edwards. And as you said, the hard-on Kamani Vidal himself. But beyond that, I don't know who else to target except for Josh Palmer, who I think is being undervalued, if only because everyone is also excited about Ladd McConkey, who may not even play in 2 wide sets. But it's not a fit for this offense in fantasy, at least. I think Herbert can excel in a game manager role because he's already excelled in being himself in a potent offense, but it's not going to be fun for fantasy.
Yeah, I think Josh Palmer is kind of more of a floor pick than something I would take a big swing on in a home league where, Josh Palmer is going to get me 800 or 900 yards probably and 60 or 70 catches probably. In a home league, that's not really going to do that much for me. But in best ball, if he's going in the 12th round or something, that's actually pretty valuable on a week-to-week basis. But yeah, I think we know what they're going to try to do. All right. This one's my favorite one. Number 2 on the list is the Tennessee Titans. Mike Vrabel. Surprisingly, I think Evan and I both disagreed with firing of Mike Vrabel, who we think and respect as a very good coach. But they go to Brian Callahan, who will be the head coach and call plays. Now, you also at the same time replace Derrick Henry with 2 space backs. And then you have Brian Callahan, whose Bengals had 3 or more wide receivers on the field 78% of the time last season. That was 3rd most in the NFL. That was even with Joe Burrow out for much of the year. On top of that, then they go out and give Calvin Ridley $50 million guaranteed. They add Callahan's old friend from the slot, Tyler Boyd. They hang on to DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks. And so it is obvious what the Titans are going to try to do this year. They are going to try to be a team that throws the ball a lot, I think. Now, is Will Levis up to that task? Is the offensive line up to that task? Those are open questions. I do think the offensive line will be way better due to coaching from the Callahan and a little bit of talent injection. But I think it's an open question. Can Will Levis handle an extreme pass-heavy attack? But I think we're going to find out. So I'm actually kind of excited about Titans guys as sneaky options. Daigle, I'll go to you here. Am I too excited about Brian Callahan overhauling this Titans offense?
Levis led the league with 22% of his throws 20 yards downfield whenever he took over in Tennessee. And that was with Vrabel, who, as we know, only depended on running on early downs. Now we're going to get a coach who wants to pass the ball first. Just like the Saints, except to a much more lucrative return, I think. We're just betting on what this offense could be if it all goes right, rather than waiting to see. Even someone like Calvin Ridley, who we're lower on compared to market because we believe DeAndre Hopkins can at least match, if not top Ridley in target share this season. But even someone like Ridley, we know that Callahan never let, if he even could, but never let T. Higgins really take over in target share. Whenever teams doubled Jamar Chase, Callahan schemed Chase closer to the line of scrimmage and hammered him targets that way. He always makes sure to get his best players the ball. And so we'll adjust on Ridley, come week 1 in home leagues in his ADP if that happens. But either way, I just want to bet on Callahan making everything work here, regardless of the final results.
Yeah. Evan, any thoughts here on Will Levis and Callahan working together here in Tennessee?
Yeah, and Brian Callahan did not call plays in Cincinnati under Zach Taylor, but to a greater extent than most of situations where we see a head coach coming in who didn't call plays in his previous stop. Like Brian Callahan has been around football his entire freaking life. I mean, I think he's probably a legit, really good coach, and that's because of Bill Callahan, who should be part of this coaching change discussion.
Yeah.
Because he's like one of the best offensive lines in the league. I also listened to an interview with Brian Callahan on The Athletic, and he was talking about how Bill Callahan is all into analytics. Like he loves the numbers, and that's not something that you would necessarily expect from a guy of his coaching tenure. You'd kind of assume that he's in the cocoon. He's like 70 years old, but he's like all into analytics, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, I mean, retaining DeAndre Hopkins, who did continue to play at a high level last year, I thought they might move him early in the offseason, but they never did. Even down to retaining Treylon Burks, who they have now as their 4th receiver, giving a ton of money to Calvin Ridley, bringing in Tyler Boyd to run the slot, and then swapping out Derrick Henry to Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. That's the biggest change in terms of physical specimen at the running back position in the entire offseason. I mean, this team is going to throw the shit out of the ball. I think they could finish top 5 in pass attempts. What do we have in Will Levis? Because I know that everybody kind of remembers that 4-touchdown game, his first game, and then it really went downhill after that. He had really bad pressure to sack rate numbers. He took, I think, more hits than anybody in any quarterback. He had the highest hit percentage in the NFL, and some of that certainly was due to the poor offensive line the Titans had. But I mean, he has a game that translates to taking a lot of hits and sacks. Can Bill Callahan help him? They did use the number 7 pick on J.C. Latham, and they signed Lloyd Cushenberry to the biggest center deal in the league. I mean, they're trying. We are going to know about Will Levis after this season, 100%. We might know by midseason.
What if Will Levis is the new Jameis Winston? Not that good in real life, but just sling it, man. Don't care about throwing interceptions. Just sling it down the field. eat some W's. It's not going to be pretty. The fans aren't going to like it, whatever. They're not going to win that many games, but for fantasy, it could be really good. That's kind of my bull case for Levis. All right. Number 1, the most important coaching change we need to know about for the 2024 season is the Atlanta Falcons. Out with King Donkey Arthur Smith. Replaced with defensive-minded Raheem Morris. And they go with Zach Robinson, yet another Sean McVay tree guy. Zach Robinson was with the Rams 4 years as the quarterback's coach, pass game coordinator. Zach Robinson will be the offensive coordinator for Raheem Morris here with the Falcons. Inherits so much talent, Daigle. I mean, inherits guys they've spent an inordinate amount of draft capital on at the top of drafts. Daigle, thoughts on Zach Robinson taking over the Falcons offense?
Forget the Michael Penix pick. Wash it away, because everything else around that has been positive this offseason for the Falcons. The margin from 32nd to 31st in drop back rate from 3 wide sets last year was actually nearly triple the amount that Atlanta instead dropped back in 3 wide sets, just 14% of the time, as you mentioned earlier. And everyone's going to, let's pretend this is the first podcast they're listening to as they begin their research for the new league year ahead of training camp. They're going to see, Drake London, our wide receiver 10 overall, Kyle Pitts a full round ahead of ADP, Bijan Robinson as a top 4, top 5 pick. But it all makes sense considering last year from Desmond Ridder, the Falcons had the lowest catchable target rate of any quarterback, of any offense. Now they're getting Kirk Cousins instead. Not only that, but Pitts is the one who really ADP isn't adjusting for yet when he has a career 12-yard depth of target, the highest any tight end with 100 targets since 2021. What if all of a sudden a new coach changes his routes and uses him just slightly closer to the line of scrimmage, slightly more over the field, rather than using him as like a go route gadget player like Arthur Smith? It all just makes too much sense for the Falcons to be one of our favorite offenses in fantasy this year, especially since Cousins is familiar with that McVay tree that Kevin O'Connell and now Robinson will likely run.
Yeah, and my thing on the Falcons is not only is this going to be an outrageous change in terms of passing rate, in terms of 3 wide receiver sets, but the offense that they're going to bring over historically with the Rams has been so concentrated. And given the personnel on the Falcons, I mean, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore have Kyle Pitts have no competition. They could play 90+% of the snaps for each of them. And obviously they've already committed, they've been adamant saying that what are you going to do with Bijan Robinson? We're going to get the ball to Bijan Robinson as many ways as we can in the most positive situations as much as we can. So they're certainly saying all the right things, the opposite effectively of Arthur Smith usage with some of these guys. Evan, thoughts on Mr. Robinson going to Atlanta?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts. Obviously, Kirk Cousins has spent his entire career in this style of offense. It's just a seamless fit. So Zach Robinson, the Falcons' new offensive coordinator, he worked for Sean McVay from 2019 through 2023. And I think a one-for-one comparison for Bijan Robinson could be Todd Gurley. Raheem Morris did an off-season interview, and he was asked, how is this offense going to go, though? And he was just Bijan Robinson. He didn't say anything about Tyler Algier, anything about any other running backs. They were mixing in a bunch of dudes last year under Arthur Smith. This is going to be the Bijan Robinson show, which is really promising to hear from a guy who didn't have a hand in drafting Bijan Robinson. The one thing to note is the use of three receiver sets historically in this style of offense extremely high. Yeah. So we've got Drake London locked in. We've got Darnell Mooney locked in. I had Rondale Moore at the end of my top 150 because I think that he might be a legitimate factor. And I think he's a really nice best ball pick as well. He can run the football. Zach Robinson comes from that Sean McVay tree. They like to hand off to running backs. You think Puka Nacua, Robert Woods back in the day, even Cooper Kupp could handle the ball out of the backfield. They'll throw him jet motion shit. I think that Rondale Moore is a legit sleeper. Now people are going to roll their eyes at that because he's been a disappointment, but he's in a quietly really intriguing situation as a late round dart throw.
For sure. The concentration. And yeah, Rams were in 3 wide receiver sets 95% of the time last season, led the entire NFL. I think that will be sticky here going to Atlanta. All right. This was good. This was fun. I think this should give people a better handle on offenses we expect to be significantly changing year over year. If you are not, be sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. We have tons of content coming and is already up on there that does not hit the audio feed. Daigle's been putting a bunch of cool videos up there, more of those to come on YouTube. Be sure you are subscribed. It is indeed free. Also, Daigle, tell the people where they can find you on these social machines if they are not already.
At Not Jay Daigle on Twitter and in the draft kit because it's coming.
Yes, and in the Discord as well. If you guys want to talk to Daigle in there, of course, if you have draft kit or best ball, you do have access to our Discord. All right, for Daigle, for Evan, for producer Luke, for producer Ryan, for the birthday girl Jerry, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.